with a break for exercise, especially if it's a nice day, spending some time with Rebecca, my wife. But otherwise, I like to work intensely. I can't work on a book just an hour or two a day. I find that I have to have a bunch of ideas in the air at the same time, kind of like a juggler. And then if I have to put them down and get them all up in the air again, then it's quite disruptive. And for that reason, I like to write every day, all day, for weeks or months at a time, whenever I can get away with it. I'm not much of a morning person, so I probably don't start until 10 a.m. I'll take a short break for lunch, then an hour or two before sunset, I'll go running or bicycling, or if I'm in Cape Cod, kayaking. And then after a nice dinner with Rebecca, I'll often get back to work. It helps that my other half, Rebecca Goldstein, is also a writer. She's written more books than I have. So she not only understands the lifestyle, but she's likely to be working on a book herself at the same time. So we're always in sync. I do an enormous amount of reading before I actually put words down on the screen. For the book that I'm working on right now, for example, I'll have read for almost a year solid before even writing. Just familiarizing myself with the background, especially in fields that I was not trained in. I'm an experimental psychologist, so when I need to write on psychology or in linguistics, a field in which I've also been trained, then I can read what I have to read and know how to interpret it and write about it. But when my writing verges on areas that I wasn't originally trained in, like evolutionary biology, or history, or legal theory, or brain science, then I have to feel that I'm thinking like a brain scientist, or thinking like a historian, or thinking like an evolutionary biologist before I start to write. I have to read enough papers from opposing viewpoints within a field that I get a feel for what the controversies are, so that when I read a claim in that field, I'll have the red flags and the suspicions and the skepticism that a practitioner in that field would have. You can only develop that sensibility by reading the controversies to get a lay of the land. On my first pass, when I'm just familiarizing myself with an area, taking the notes and organizing them would be more trouble than it's worth. I do make extensive marginalia, both on the pages and in the front and back covers. This is just getting myself acquainted with an area of research. Then when it actually comes time to writing, then I will go over the sources again, and I will make extensive notes keyed to actual page numbers. I find through bitter experience that memory for passages, and worse, rendering of quotes, is shockingly error-prone. That even when you're typing a quote from a book right next to you, it is very easy to get a word or two or punctuation wrong. And so I've forced myself to go back to the quotes to make sure that every semicolon is exactly as it was in the original. Organizing material is one of the big challenges in preparing for a book, especially since I like to illustrate abstract academic ideas with real-world examples, with cartoons, with song lyrics, with snatches of dialogue from movies, not as a way to just sort of tart up the prose or to wake up a reader in the midst of a boring discussion, but rather because the things that I'm interested in are things that play themselves out in everyday life. We all live by language. When I write about humor, it helps to be able to give examples of some funny things. When I write about conversation, to give dialogue from movies. When I write about violence, to have actual examples from the newspapers or the history books. So even when I'm not working on a book, I will amass a collection of psychologically relevant bits of culture. If I see a cartoon that makes some interesting point, even if I don't know when or whether I'll ever write a book about it, I'll file it in a file that I have of psychology cartoons. These are the ones for language. Since I was a graduate student. This one's actually on a comic on free will. I've never actually used that. But it's got it's from Monty, and it's got a space alien who has a prognosticator that can predict the future actions of any individual. Yeah, taboo. I've got cartoons for irregular past tense forms, believe it or not. I have little examples. It will not only affect your kids, but your kids' kids. I heard that in a documentary on arts and entertainment on the real Aaron Brockovich, March 15th, 2000, said by Nola Wetterman, resident. So that's just a little linguistic example. Oh, Der Spiegel, die Manns, the plural of Thomas Mann, and that is Thomas Mann and his wife aren't the men, but the mans, even in German. Father of West's jackalope. We just throwed the dead jackrabbits in the shop when we came in, and it slid on the floor right up against a pair of deer horns. That's the origin of the jackalope, but for me, the fact that he used throwed rather than threw is something that I wanted to be able to explain. Again, on language. So we've got a big dog up in the sky saying, well, yes, considering you people have been spelling my name backwards all the time, I imagine this would come as a bit of a surprise to you. So, on how you can't predict the meaning of a word from the meaning of the individual letters that make it up. So for just about any topic, I've got a cartoon somewhere. Oh, I like this one. I'm not sure what this is apropos of. See, the problem with doing things to prolong your life is that all the extra years come at the end when you're old. Then often when I start working on a book, I'll go through all of my interesting, topical, humorous examples to see which of them will fit in. Now that's just for clippings. For books, and articles, I will also clip out, and I have both physical files in a file cabinet and computer files. For my most recent book, I try to have electronic copies of every article that I will cite. For articles of the last 10 years, that's easy because they're published in the academic journals in electronic form and in newspapers. For earlier ones, I have an assistant scan them in, and I make PDFs so that, and I'll have a hard copy. Hard copy is easier to mark up and to spread them all on a desk as opposed to crowding them into a little computer screen. But then sometimes I need to search for snippets of text, and for that it really helps to have the electronic copy as well. I actually learned this from one of my graduate students. He said that he didn't have a file cabinet full of reprints, that all of his articles were on his laptop. And you often learn from technology from younger people who've grown up with it. It never occurred to me that a computer disk would be big enough to store the equivalent of several file drawers of articles, but of course now as disks have become cheaper and bigger, it is feasible to keep your entire scholarly library of reprints on your computer. But for me, I try to have both. For books, in many cases you have no choice but to get books out of a university library. But I like to own books when I can. And so I do the one click on the online bookstores, and I have almost a daily delivery from the UPS guy who's come to know me from all of my deliveries from the online bookstores. I like to be able to mark them up. I like to be able to go back to them if I read something that I've written on a subsequent draft and I wonder if I got it right the first time, or I want to fact check, and it would take me much, much longer if for every book I would have to retrieve it from the library. Fortunately, with paperbacks and with used books, which are easily accessible in online sites, it's not so hard to keep an extensive personal library. I rely on rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. My books will go through anywhere from 5 to 6 drafts. What I'll do is I'll put down material in a first draft, and I write from beginning to end of a chapter. I dislike having placeholders like get back to this and fill it in later. So I try to go from beginning to end. Then I'll take one more pass, because inevitably that first pass will be choppy, there'll be missing transitions, there'll be unclear passages that I know are unclear because I may not understand them a month later, having just written them. So then I'll polish that chapter draft. So that'll be draft number 2. Then I'll go on to the next chapter. So everything goes through 2 drafts. Then I'll share chapters with colleagues who have expertise in what I'm writing about to get their feedback, so they point out the more embarrassing errors. Then I'll put the whole book through another draft, typically then send it to my editor at the publisher, get her comments or his comments, and then we'll put it through two more drafts, again, a chapter, then back to the beginning of the chapter to smooth and polish what I just wrote. And then I'll take one more pass through the entire book from beginning to end to sand down the rough edges, to make early parts consistent with later parts, just to feel good about the quality of the prose of the whole thing. And this doesn't count, by the way, the other drafts subsequent to that I do when I get it back from the copy editor, who goes over every last comma and italics, and will often give me feedback of passages that she doesn't understand, or that she disagrees with, or that she thinks are badly expressed. So in the end, it's actually even more than 6 drafts. Yes, embarrassingly. I've long believed in that bookshelves should be arranged in cubes. I think bookends are a nuisance. The books always flop around. And also cubes allow you to organize books by subject, which is essential if you have as many books as I do. So I got a labeler, and at some point a few years ago I discovered a place on the web that sells modular cubicle bookshelves. You can add to them up, down, sideways as your needs changed. In fact, I brought these with me from a much smaller apartment when I moved here. But I became such a regular customer with this online bookshelf store that they got to know me, and they recognized me from my books, and they asked if I would be willing to plug their product. And so I said, sure. They said, well, if you are willing to go on this program called I Want That on a cable network that I never heard of either the show or the network, we'll give you some free shelves. And I thought, great, I could use another row on the very top. And figured, no one would. I'd never heard of the show, I never heard of the network. So a camera person came in, and I was kind of hamming it up, extolling the virtues of these bookshelves, which I really do like, by the way. I didn't say anything I didn't believe, and showing how I kind of in an obsessive compulsive way file all the books and label the cubes with little stick-on labels, and I was kind of generally hamming it up for them. And got my bookshelves, and I'd never heard of the phenomenon called YouTube, which barely existed at the time. But the next thing I knew, someone somewhere actually watched this program. And if you search for my name on YouTube, at least this was true a year or so ago, one of the first hits is me being a pitchman shilling for this product. But anyway, I do believe in it. Smart furniture, great bookshelf system for anyone who has a lot of books. I stand by my endorsement, but it is not the kind of fame that I actually wanted to have on YouTube. Not only read and write a lot of books, but I'm married to someone who does, and when we got together, we merged our collections, which even added to the confusion because we're interested in many of the same topics like philosophy, like history. So it was absolutely essential to get organized. So we have, these are more, we merged our books, but these are have a greater concentration from Rebecca than me, but we've got history of philosophy, philosophy of mind. Then we've got particular philosophers. Here we've got Spinoza. Rebecca wrote a book on Spinoza. Rousseau, Kurt Gödel. She wrote a book on Gödel. And then going up, we've got existentialism over here, history of science. Then my books tend to be a little higher. I've got general science. There's medicine. Richard Dawkins has his own cube. We have books on engineering. Biography and memoir. There's a whole string of cubes. Well, let's see. In fact, it's kind of timely. Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, is, I think, one of the best trade science books ever written. Because not only is it clear and witty and stylish, but it actually had an impact in science itself. He was making a contribution both to the public understanding of science, but also offered a framework for biologists themselves to rethink what they were doing. And I suspect that this book gets more citations in the primary scientific literature than the vast majority of technical scientific papers. But in fact, this is a new edition that has an extensive set of footnotes updating the material in light of the science that came out since the book was first published. And as it happens, there's actually a kind of technical question on parent-offspring conflict and how to calculate relatedness that I've just been meaning to check up on. So thanks for the reminder. A book that I bought when I was an undergraduate in 1975, Noam Chomsky, Reflections on Language, that I have used ever since. It's actually quite yellow. I think this is before the era of acid-free paper. And so I might sort of self-compost one of these days. The other problem is that a lot of my books are in my office at Harvard, and then another bunch of them are we have a house on Cape Cod that we spend the summers in, and so I have a whole collection of them there as well. Geez, it's like one of those exercises that they give math students, like, how many hot dogs are sold at Fenway Park on any given night. I think I probably have to imagine how many bookshelves and multiply by the linear feet. I don't know. It must be in the thousands. And growing every day thanks to one click. It's kind of like crack cocaine. Like you just can't see one book and then Amazon recommends a bunch of others and you can't help but one clicking on those as well. Oh, The Mountain of Names. This was a wonderful book by a journalist, Alex Shumatoff, on how names spread, how they're given, and actually using names as really more of an excuse to study the phenomenon of genealogy and kinship. What kinds of family structures you find across societies. What does the mathematics of genealogy do to our cultural and social institutions? And I actually went back to this after having read it many years ago. I went back to it last summer when I was doing an article on the genealogy craze for a magazine, where this is on the heels of the discovery of unlikely kinship pairs, like that. I think Al Sharpton's ancestor was a slave of Strom Thurmond's ancestor, or George Bush and Al Gore are actually related to each other. But this book had wonderful examples of how easy it is to find that almost any randomly selected pair of people will have a common ancestor, simply because of the mathematics of kinship. Every one of us has 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. It increases exponentially the farther back you go. Since there was no point in the Earth's history in which people were standing shoulder to shoulder 6 deep, there just weren't enough ancestors to go around. So if you go back a few generations, one person's family tree inevitably overlaps with someone else's, and therefore any 2 people will be related. It's a phenomenon sometimes called pedigree collapse, that any person's pedigree extends outward as you go back in time until there weren't enough people to go around, in which case it collapses back upon itself. Phenomenon I first learned about from this book. Somehow it stuck in memory for several decades. When I had to write that article, I went back to it and found exactly the annotations that I had made several decades before. Jimmy Carter and Richard Nixon are 6th cousins, both descended from a New Jersey Quaker. Queen Geraldine of Albania, Richard Henry Dana, Emily Dickinson, George Plimpton, Julie Harris, and Margaret Mead are all related. And in fact, there's a quote here, which I think I reproduced, that it's virtually certain that you were a direct descendant of Muhammad and every fertile predecessor of his, including Krishna, Confucius, Abraham, Buddha, Caesar, Ishmael, and Judas Iscariot. These are organized by subject. This is the nonfiction side. And Rebecca is a novelist, and so whenever anyone does something, they're always an expert in what they do. I know musicians have huge record collections, and novelists have huge collections of novels. In the case of the novels, there are so many that just to have a fiction section would have been useless. So these are alphabetical. That seems very anal retentive, but it was a necessity. I do, although I'm far more nonfiction. But yeah, yes, I do. In fact, one summer, Rebecca and I decided to pick a classic book that somehow both of us had gone through our lives without having read, and read it to each other every night. So we did that with Moby Dick last summer. Somehow neither of us had ever read it, and so we had a wonderful time. We weren't able to follow through this past summer because Rebecca was a judge for the National Book Award in fiction and had to read 272 novels over the course of the summer. So the last thing she felt like doing before bed was reading yet another novel. So we had to skip last summer, but next summer we might do the Pickwick Papers. I loved Moby Dick, partly, and it was wonderful to read it on Cape Cod, which has its own whaling history, and a lot of the book is on the history of whaling and whales, and so that made it even more concrete. My major hobby is photography, especially landscape photography, and spending summers in Cape Cod gives me a lot of opportunities. So these 6 are all from Truro, Massachusetts. This was a night in which Jupiter and Venus were in the same part of the sky as the moon, also illuminated by a bit of earth shine, all 3 of them reflecting on the water. So I was quite delighted by that scene. I put it on my website, and an astronomer who was doing a Google search for Venus, Jupiter, moon came across it and asked if he could use it. We've got a view of Provincetown, including the Pilgrim Monument, rather incongruously modeled after a tower in Siena, Italy. The Little Pamet River on a cloudy day. A guy raking for sand eels that are used as bait by fishermen. The inlet to Pamet Harbor on a blue evening. And these are from various parts of the world. This is from Santa Barbara, where I spent a sabbatical year. We've got an Osprey in flight. This is Mount Rundle in the Canadian Rockies near Banff. This is the University of California, Santa Barbara campus from the air. My friend Jack Loomis is a pilot and took me up in his plane once, and I took the Santa Barbara campus. The university's asked me to use that photo a couple of times. This is a result of an avalanche in Lake Louise. A manzanita tree in Santa Barbara. The Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience actually used that on its cover once. Got I believe that's a Steller's jay from Big Sur. This is Denali, also known as Mount McKinley from Alaska. We've got a moth that just perched itself on a flower in a very pleasing way. Kind of reminds me of Robert Frost's poem Design, about a configuration of a spider web and a flower that tickled his fancy, and this tickled mine. I have a Canon with this zoom lens is the one I carry when I'm just walking, going for a walk, and if I ever find something unusual, I'll have it at the ready. When I do nature photography, I'll have a big backpack full of bazookas and other paraphernalia. Since December '02, which is when they first had enough megapixels to convince me that it had the same quality as slide film. I do a fair amount of Photoshop work. I do all of the things that used to be done in the darkroom, adjusting contrast, cropping, getting rid of dust spots, and then I print them myself. Digital printing now is so, you can get such high quality with such inexpensive printers that I just do it right here in my own study. This is my printer, and one problem with digital printing is, like computers in general, it's very user unfriendly. And there are about a dozen settings, some of them with the printer driver, some of them with Photoshop, that contradict each other. So I have to keep making little post-it notes of which settings actually work together. So this source space settings and which profile, because I might go months between printing sessions, and then I have to remind myself what the settings are that don't make everything turn out green. I think I've been interested since I was a child, but it certainly was accentuated when I started studying visual cognition in graduate school. It just became much more attentive to the visual world, to color, to form, to perspective. And I think that probably combined with a kind of nerdy interest in gadgets. I do like camera hardware as well, and just made it a natural combination. And I also just like enhancing human memory. You visit a site, you can never recapture the experience, but with a nice photograph, it gives you an occasion to at least partly revisit it in your own mind. So here I have reference books. I've got the compact Oxford English Dictionary. I have a bunch of grammars and style manuals. Samuel Johnson's dictionary. Sometimes, yeah. And then books on recreational linguistics. That is, books of wordplay, puns, anagrams, palindromes. Now with the web, I rely on these less than I used to. Dictionaries, the Oxford Companion to English Literature, I have to look up a literary reference. Books of quotations, Bartlett's, Isaac Asimov's Book of Science quotations. They Never Said It, a wonderful book of fake quotes, misquotes, and misleading attributions to get me out of the writer's habit of attributing everything to Mark Twain. I got the 776 Even Stupider Things Ever Said. Dictionary of Popular Yiddish Words, Phrases, and Proverbs. And invaluable is the Christopher Cerf and Victor Navasky's The Excerpts Speak, where for any subject you can go back and find some expert making a spectacularly embarrassing wrong prediction about how it would turn out. And then the books that I'm actually working on. Right now, I'm working on a book on the decline of violence, and so this is just a sample of the books that I'm promised myself to read, including The Chemical Weapons Taboo, on killing, Preventing Genocide, Evolutionary Psychology and Violence, Structures of Social Life, The State, War and the State of War, Eichmann in Jerusalem, the original, which I got from my mother. She'd had it since, this is a original hardcover from 1963 when the book came out, and she just gave it to me. This was the book that established that quite ordinary people can do atrocious things just in the course of their everyday work. I keep here copies of all of my own books in all of the different editions and translations. And books in general are nice things to look at. So I think just a pleasant visual backdrop to have books, and so why not my own? Yeah, that's right. Every time I get a translation or a book comes out in a new edition, I'll add it to this collection. So this is, it's going to be really embarrassing if I get this wrong. Well, here's the language instinct in Arabic. L'istinto del linguaggio, so there is in Italian. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is Hungarian. Hungarian's not an Indo-European language, and so it's completely unrecognizable from the, unlike the Italian, l'istinto del linguaggio, which, by the way, tells us that both instinct and language are from Latin. And there's l'instinct du langage, French, der Sprachinstinkt, German. I've got the British edition, both in paperback, and every once in a while they'll change the cover so that customers will think it's a new book. Then I've got How the Mind Works in Various Languages. I think this is Korean, if I'm not mistaken. This is Japanese. Cómo funciona la mente in Spanish. Cómo fonctionne l'esprit in French. Apparently in German, there was no way to translate it because there's no word for the mind that's exactly equivalent to ours. So I have the very strange title, Wie das Denken im Kopf entsteht, how thoughts come out of the head. That's the best they could do. Here's Polish, How the Mind Works. And in fact, I visited Poland to publicize a subsequent book. Here, my publisher, Penguin Books, has a lovely tradition that if one of their authors gets a book on the New York Times bestseller list, they make up a fancy copy of it with leather binding, gold trim, gold pages, and they give it a monogram, and they give it to the author as a keepsake and a reward. So I have that together with the version that's actually sold in stores. Then the British publisher always has their own cover. So this is the American cover with these colored icons representing the stuff of thought, and the Brits had a completely different idea of what sells. They also decided that it didn't need its subtitle, so the American edition, the subtitle, which I think is pretty descriptive, is Language as a Window into Human Nature. But the British edition has no subtitle, for whatever reason. Then the British also had a little marketing gimmick where they took one of the chapters of the Stuff of Thought and they reprinted it as a little micro book that they sold for a few pence. This one, The 7 Words You Can't Say on Television, an homage to George Carlin, is from the chapter on swearing from the book, and they sold it separately. They did that also with, for my previous book, they excerpted a chapter called Hotheads and sold it separately. They managed to spell my name wrong on the spine, but I've forgiven them. And then we have Rebecca's. Well, since I'm married to another author, we have a collection of her fiction and nonfiction also here, and again in various languages, editions.